Join us in the fight to restore liberty and American exceptionalism. Together, let's make the case that our charters of freedom are worth defending and honoring. Right here is where the great American experiment comes alive. Let's get to work. Yes?
I just have a comment. For me, sometimes it's so difficult for me to take the emotion out. So now I'm fine. But so if you could address how do we take the emotion out of it? Because then our message, I think we have to maintain it.
Don't take the emotion out entirely. You've got to be emotional. Let me just take you back to my trial lawyer days, and I'll tell you, you study people and how people respond in a jury box. It's interesting, I'm just reading studies of how jurors respond to attorneys. One of the biggest complaints of jurors, and many of you may have sat on a jury before, one of the biggest complaint according to various polls is that many jurors did not believe that the lawyers cared about their case. They were simply logical, and that was it. And they thought that was supposed to carry the day. The fact of the matter is, when we're talking about argumentation, we want to be logical, we want to be credible, but we want to be passionate. We want others to know that we care about the issue. If we come in as logical robots, it's very difficult at times to persuade other people. But if we come in on an emotional issue like this and show that we care about the issue, but we also have logic behind us and we're credible, and when I say credible, what I mean by that is I'm not yelling and screaming. Right? I bring an element of credibility to the table, and I can sit down and talk, and I can listen, and I can rebut. You know, this is one thing that I really try and teach my college students in a course where I teach them how to argue, is they get really frustrated when people start to talk over them, even in a classroom environment. I said, your greatest asset can be the ability to allow someone to talk over you, step back, listen, and then when you have that moment, you're going to remind them, hey, you've interrupted me, and I've let you speak. I've let you speak your piece, okay? And then to go and to be patient in waiting your turn, and when you have that opportunity, you know, there's great power in that. And so we want to bring passion to the table, but you're right, we don't want to rely entirely on emotion. Because in our culture right now, we're a culture that relies a lot on emotion. He who yells the loudest wins in our culture, oftentimes. We've got to move beyond that, and there are certainly ways to do that. So let's take a look at some of the hard cases here. It's cruel for pro-lifers to force great women to carry. The pro-choice position is not that abortion should be legal only in cases of rape or incest, but that any woman can kill any baby at any point in the pregnancy for any reason or no reason. Okay, this is not just my opinion. This is actually Roe v. Wade. Right? A lot of people out there say Roe v. Wade says you can't have an abortion in the first trimester. That is not true. That is not what Roe v. Wade says. It outlines two parameters. Number one, you can't have an abortion beyond the third trimester, but it also says that if a doctor discovers that it would be physically a problem, it would create a hazard for the woman's health to deliver this baby, even after the first trimester, abortion is permitted. That's what Roe v. Wade says. So here's what we need to do. Here's how we counter these ideas, knowing that that's what Roe v. Wade says, is this. Here's how you need to counter the argument. And this is beautiful stuff right here. I'm going to grant you, for the sake of discussion, that we keep abortion legal in cases of rape. Are you willing to join me in working to ban all other abortions, 97% of which are done mostly for convenience? If not, why did you bring up rape except to deceive the audience into believing that you support abortion only for the hard cases? We've got to turn the tables here, because we know that most abortions are not done in cases of rape. We know that most abortions are not performed as a result of incest. That's less than a percentage. These hard cases that they want to talk about are not the majority of cases. Well over 90% of all cases of abortion are done out of convenience. They don't want to have the child. And so they want to focus the discussion, again, going back to Catherine Colbert, focus on the circumstances of the woman. It's rape. The fact of the matter is, let's talk about, before we get to the hard cases, well, let's talk about what goes on most of the time. They don't want to go there. They don't want to talk about convenience. Yes?
Most of the time in low-income neighborhoods, and so much of that, like, when you talk about logic, the statistics are out there, and they've been out that's where Planned Parenthood goes.
Right. That's right. Right. Planned Parenthood, again, talk about euphemisms. You talk about using words. Planned Parenthood, tell me why they're not presenting both sides when the individual comes in to sit down and talk about whether or not they should carry on. Why is the abortion almost always the only option? Pro-lifers are unwilling to adopt and care for babies. How do we counter that? How would this in any way justify the act of dismembering a defenseless child? How would it? Let's turn the tables. If it in fact is life, tell me how, simply because we are unwilling. Let's just assume for the sake of argument, I'm not interested in adopting these children. How does that change anything? How does that change the idea that that life should be protected? How does that support your position that it's okay to dismember that child? We know, number one, that that's false, that there's not people out there. You got people lining up in droves to adopt. Here's really what they're saying. Unless you are willing to marry my wife, you have no right to oppose my beating her. What's that all about? Right? Okay? I mean, what, just because I'm not willing to stand up and do certain things, or you haven't experienced certain things, or are willing to come to the table with certain ideas and with certain proposals, you can't be involved in this debate. Or how about this one? Unless you employ ex-slaves in your business, you have no right to oppose slavery. Now, you're not going to kick me out of this debate. You're not kicking me out of this argument because you want to try and trap me into this idea because I'm not willing to put my name down on a piece of paper saying I'm ready to adopt. You're not taking anybody out of this debate. If you're going to take us out of the debate, let's talk about these things, right? We're not going to be removed of the debate. Slavery, assaulting, domestic violence. We have a right to be involved in these issues. That's the great American experiment. It's the contest of ideas, and we want to engage in that contest. Yes?
It seems to me that they readily rely on the straw man argument.
Yes.
And so what we have to do is just completely ignore the straw man and just continue on the course of
Right.
original argumentation. They want us to go down these rabbit trails and to attack the straw man.
That's right.
Ignore the straw man.
That is a great point. I often refer to it as, a dog comes in and what's on your floor. What do you do to the dog? You take a piece of paper, newspaper, you hit him on the nose. That's what this is doing. This is all it's doing. It's saying, it's a slap on the nose, now let's get back. Right? Here's why that argument makes no sense. Slap on the nose, here we go. Get back to that argument, the main argument, which is protecting life and why it's worth protecting. This is abortion only legal during the first trimester. Centers for Disease Control's abortion surveillance report, 13% of all abortions annually are done after 13 weeks. 181,000 babies are killed each year after the first trimester. Don't buy into the line that it cannot happen after the first trimester. It's simply not true. Numerous abortionists acknowledge doing procedures as late as 32 weeks. Right? Not our idea. It's not a conspiracy theory. These are abortionists coming out and saying they are performing abortions. In fact, right here, American Medical News. Martin Haskell said, in my particular practice, probably 20% are for genetic reasons and the other 80% are purely elective. And then this is at a training that he did, talking about what is done at the late stages as well as the early stages. The surgeon then forces the scissors into the base of the skull, dismembering the child, right? This is just tragic. And because we're not seeing it in front of our eyes, we tend to step back and say, well, we take that emotion out of it. But when you start to think about these things, I remember reading Ron Paul, doctor. He was talking about going through his residency. And he said, I walked in one of the first times I saw a baby being delivered, and he said, I didn't really know what was going to happen. I wasn't really put up to speed on what was happening. But he said they took the baby that was just delivered and they walked over to the corner of the room and they dumped the baby in a can. And he said that was overwhelming for him. He says, I talked about these ideas over and over and over again, and we can do that in an academic environment. But to see that sort of thing take place, incredibly emotional. Partial birth abortion done only to save the mother's life. Abortion advocates claim that only 500 partial birth abortions are done yearly. The Bergen Report reports 1,500 partial birth abortions are done annually in New Jersey alone. And yet they want us to believe that just a few of them take place each and every year. And of course they want us to believe that it's done for the health of the child, for the health of the mother. So, simply not true. All right, so here we go. Right, if we don't allow for abortions, if we make them illegal, back alley abortions would increase. Oh, is that right? Well, racists once argued that equal treatment for blacks would result in terrible riots and cause untold suffering among law-abiding citizens. In other words, do you stop fighting for freedom simply because you believe that there may be tragic consequences that take place behind closed doors? Again, what does the assumption begin with? What is the premise of this argument? That it's not a human life. We have to be the people that bring that constantly back. When you're talking about blacks being oppressed, right? Do we stop fighting for freedom for all people simply because we believe that riots are going to take place? That's silliness. People are going to drive drunk despite the law, so let's make it safe and legal for them to do so. That's silliness. Laws banning murder are not always followed. Do we get rid of those laws? There's still murderers out there. There's still people that do a lot of bad things out there. And we still have homicide on the books. Well, man, putting homicide on the books, you're still going to have people that are going to go around murdering other people. That's not the issue here. But they want it to be the issue. The issue is life is worth defending. And we need to put laws in place, despite the fact that some will ignore the law. If it's a human life, there's an obligation that we have as people to protect it, and there's an obligation that government has to protect it. The 5th and 14th Amendment both tell us that you cannot take life away. You cannot take liberty away unless due process of law has been satisfied. Here you have individuals simply taking life, and government is endorsing this. Okay. Poor women can't afford to care for children. Here we go, the comment that was made a little bit earlier. Well, what is that? Let's talk about the illogic argument here. The smoking of crack cocaine should be legalized because the poor cannot afford such a glamorous drug as can the rich. Right? Just because one demographic may say, you know what, we're going to continue to do this because we can't afford the care that wealthier individuals might be able to afford. That's silliness. It's wrong to restrict child pornography because the rich can still obtain these materials illegally while the poor cannot. Now, this is silliness. To simply say that a particular group of people will continue to do things even in spite of the law, and it's going to create a more dangerous society, is silliness. Again, it begins with the underlying premise that it is not a life. We got to bring them back to the idea that it is a life. Can't afford to feed. That's a good argument for killing off any family member who happens to strain the family budget. We talked about that a little bit earlier, didn't we? Well, okay, well, the child's retarded. That's going to take a lot of resources. Handicapped in some way, it's going to take a lot of resources. Okay, so when the child takes more resources than the average, then of course now we're in a position to decide whether or not that life is valuable enough to protect. We have professors, a professor by the last name of Singer, probably not related to you, I hope not, out on the East Coast. I'm not remembering where he was out of. I believe he was out of Yale, but talked about being able to terminate the life of a handicapped child, 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, because of that strain. That's where we're going. And that's the slippery slope, right? Strain on the family, strain on society, strain on the taxpayers. We get to decide the value of that life. And if the value doesn't meet up to par, then we can destroy that life.